The Morrison family had been planning their autumn road trip through Virginia's scenic countryside for months. David Morrison, a 45-year-old accountant from Richmond, had promised his wife Sarah and their twin daughters, Emma and Sophie, aged 16, that they would explore the Blue Ridge Mountains during the peak of fall foliage season. It was meant to be a peaceful family getaway, a chance to disconnect from their busy lives and reconnect with each other while surrounded by nature's spectacular display of colors. Sarah, a high school English teacher, had researched charming bed and breakfasts in historic towns along their route, while the twins had reluctantly agreed to put away their phones for the weekend in exchange for permission to bring their best friends on the next family vacation. David had meticulously planned their route using the latest GPS technology, downloading offline maps and ensuring their rental SUV was equipped with the most up-to-date navigation system available. The first day of their trip had been everything they had hoped for. They had driven through picturesque small towns, stopped at roadside fruit stands, and taken countless photos of the brilliant red and gold leaves that painted the mountainsides like a vast canvas. They had enjoyed a leisurely lunch at a historic inn in Shenandoah County and spent the afternoon hiking a section of the Appalachian Trail, where the girls had grudgingly admitted that nature was actually pretty cool. As evening approached on Saturday, October 15th, they were driving toward their reserved accommodations at a highly rated country inn near Luray. The GPS had been performing flawlessly all day, guiding them along scenic routes and helping them avoid the heavy traffic that typically clogged the main highways during peak tourist season. David had come to rely on the device completely, trusting its recommendations over his own sense of direction in the unfamiliar mountainous terrain. It was just after 6 p.m., with darkness beginning to settle over the winding mountain roads, when the GPS first began behaving strangely. David noticed that the device kept recalculating their route, even though they were following its directions precisely. The screen would flash recalculating every few minutes, accompanied by the familiar chiming sound that indicated a route change. "Dad, why does it keep doing that?" Emma asked from the back seat, looking up from the book she had been reading by the dome light. "I'm not sure, honey. Maybe it's having trouble with the satellite signal in these mountains," David replied, though he was privately concerned. The GPS had worked perfectly in similar terrain earlier in the day, and the weather was clear with no obvious obstacles to satellite reception. The recalculations became more frequent and more insistent. Each time the device recalculated, it directed them to make a right turn onto a small side road marked Forest Service Road 847. David ignored the first few prompts, assuming it was a glitch that would resolve itself. But as they continued toward their destination, the GPS became increasingly aggressive in its redirection attempts. "Turn right in 500 feet, the device announced in its familiar synthetic voice, even though they were clearly meant to continue straight on the main road according to their planned route. "Turn right in 200 feet. Turn right. When possible, make a U-turn and proceed to the highlighted route." Sarah looked at the GPS screen with growing concern. "David, something's definitely wrong with this thing. It's showing that Forest Service Road like it's our destination, but our inn is still 20 miles ahead on the main highway." David pulled over at a scenic overlook to examine the GPS more closely. The device was displaying their route clearly, but every time he tried to select Continue to Destination, the system would immediately recalculate and redirect them back to Forest Service Road 847. Even more troubling, when he tried to manually input the inn's address again, the GPS seemed to accept the input but then immediately reverted to showing the Forest Service Road as their destination. The twins were becoming restless in the back seat. "Can't we just use our phones?" Sophie asked, pulling out her iPhone. But when she tried to access her map application, she discovered that they had no cellular signal. The phone showed no bars and couldn't connect to any data network. "That's weird," Emma said, checking her own phone. "I don't have any signal either. We had full bars just a few miles back." David tried his phone and found the same result, no signal whatsoever. The dead zone seemed to have appeared suddenly, coinciding with the GPS malfunctions. In his years of traveling for work, he had never encountered such a complete communication blackout in an area that should have had decent coverage. The GPS continued its insistent redirection. Every few seconds, it would announce proceed to the highlighted route or turn around when possible. The repetitive commands were becoming almost hypnotic, and David found himself growing increasingly frustrated with the device's apparent malfunction. What if we just turn it off and use the old-fashioned method? Sarah suggested, reaching for the road atlas they kept in the glove compartment. But when she tried to power down the GPS, the device wouldn't respond to the power button. It seemed to be locked in its current state, continuously displaying the route to Forest Service Road 847. After 20 minutes of troubleshooting, David made a decision that would change their family's life forever. You know what? Let's just go see what's down that road. Maybe there's some kind of interference or something we can identify. We can't be stuck here all night, and the GPS obviously isn't going to let us go anywhere else. Sarah felt uneasy about the decision, but they seemed to have few alternatives. The sun had set completely, leaving them in the isolated mountain darkness with no way to communicate with the outside world and no functioning navigation system beyond the malfunctioning GPS that seemed obsessed with a single destination. Forest Service Road 847 was marked by a small, weathered sign that was barely visible in their headlights. The road was unpaved, consisting of packed dirt and gravel that had seen better days. Potholes and washouts from recent rains made the driving treacherous, forcing David to maintain a slow, careful pace as they descended into the dense forest that pressed against both sides of the narrow road. The trees seemed to close in around them as they drove deeper into the woods. Ancient oaks and maples formed a canopy so thick that even with their high-beam headlights, they could see only a few yards ahead. The GPS continued to guide them forward, its screen showing that they were approaching their destination, though no destination had been explicitly programmed. "This is really creepy," Emma whispered, unconsciously moving closer to her sister in the back seat. The forest around them was completely silent except for the sound of their engine and the crunch of gravel under their tires. No birds, no insects, no wind, just an oppressive quiet that seemed to muffle even their own voices. After what felt like an eternity but was actually only about 15 minutes of slow driving, the GPS announced destination reached and fell silent for the first time in over an hour. David brought the SUV to a stop in what appeared to be a small clearing surrounded by towering trees. Their headlights illuminated what looked like the remnants of an old campsite, a fire ring made of stones, some rotting wooden picnic tables, and the remains of what might have once been a small shelter or lean-to. "Well, we're here," David said, though his voice carried more uncertainty than confidence. "Whatever here is supposed to be." The GPS screen now showed a simple message: arrived at destination. When David tried to input a new destination, the device responded normally for the first time since the malfunctions began. It was as if reaching this specific location had somehow reset the system's normal functionality. Sarah opened her phone and was surprised to find that their cellular signal had returned. She immediately tried to call the inn to explain their delay, but found that she couldn't focus on the conversation. Something about the clearing felt wrong, not just isolated or creepy, but fundamentally disturbed, as if the very ground beneath them held secrets that had been buried for too long. "Dad, can we get out and look around?" Sophie asked, though her voice suggested she wasn't entirely sure she wanted to explore the area. David considered the request. They had come this far, and the GPS malfunction had been so persistent that he was curious about what might make this location special enough to cause such technological interference. "Just for a few minutes. Stay close to the car, and everyone take a flashlight." They climbed out of the SUV, and immediately the oppressive silence of the forest enveloped them. Their flashlight beams revealed more details of the abandoned campsite, scattered pieces of camping equipment, old cans and bottles, and what appeared to be the remains of a tent that had been left to rot among the fallen leaves. It was Emma who first noticed something that didn't belong with typical camping debris. Her flashlight beam caught something pale and oddly shaped among the roots of a large oak tree about 30 yards from the clearing. "Dad, there's something over here," she called, her voice tight with apprehension. David approached with his own flashlight. Sarah and Sophie close behind. What Emma had discovered was unmistakably human remains, a skull, partially buried under years of accumulated leaves and forest debris. The bone was weathered but intact, and it was clear that more remains were likely buried in the area. "Everyone back to the car. Now." David's voice carried an authority that brooked no argument. The family quickly retreated to the safety of their vehicle, where Sarah immediately called 911 despite her hands shaking so badly she could barely operate her phone. The 911 dispatcher, Maria Rodriguez, had been handling emergency calls for Shenandoah County for over 15 years, but she had never received a call quite like Sarah's. The location the family described was in a remote section of the George Washington National Forest that rarely saw visitors, and certainly wasn't accessible by normal GPS routing. "Ma'am, can you confirm your exact location?" "Forest Service Road 847 doesn't appear on our emergency response maps," Maria said, though she was already dispatching deputies to the general area. David provided the GPS coordinates displayed on their now functional device, and Maria felt a chill as she recognized the numbers. Those coordinates had appeared in a decades-old missing person case file that had crossed her desk during a recent cold case review. Sheriff's deputies arrived within 45 minutes, guided to the location by the Morrison family's GPS coordinates. Deputy James Crawford, a veteran officer with 23 years of experience, immediately recognized the significance of what the family had discovered. The remains were clearly old, possibly decades old, and the remote location suggested that they had been deliberately concealed. The scene was secured, and the Morrison family was asked to provide detailed statements about how they had come to discover the location. Their story about the GPS malfunction was met with initial skepticism, until the deputies tried to leave the area and experienced similar navigation problems with their own GPS units. Detective Lieutenant Maria Santos, who headed the county's cold case unit, arrived at the scene just after midnight. She had been working cold cases for over a decade, and the Virginia State Police had recently launched an expanded cold case database to help solve decades-old disappearances. The coordinates provided by the Morrison family matched a location that had been mentioned in witness statements from a 1987 missing person case. The case involved Thomas "Tommy" Brennan, a 23-year-old college student from Virginia Tech who had disappeared while camping alone in the George Washington National Forest during his spring break. Tommy had told friends he was planning to explore some remote camping areas and do some nature photography, but he had never returned home. His car had been found abandoned at a different trailhead 15 miles away, with no signs of struggle or obvious explanation for his disappearance. The investigation had gone cold after 6 months, despite extensive searches of the forest areas where Tommy had planned to camp. The dense woods and rugged terrain had made comprehensive searches nearly impossible, and without any concrete leads, the case had eventually been filed away with dozens of other unsolved disappearances in rural Virginia. Detective Santos immediately recognized the potential significance of the Morrison family's discovery. The location they had found was not accessible by normal hiking routes and was far from any established campgrounds or trails. Someone would have needed specific knowledge of the area and deliberate intent to reach this particular clearing. The forensic team that arrived at dawn confirmed what Detective Santos suspected. The remains were consistent with a young adult male who had been deceased for several decades. Personal effects found with the remains, including a corroded Virginia Tech class ring and the remnants of camera equipment, strongly suggested that these were Tommy Brennan's remains. But the mystery deepened when forensic investigators discovered electronic equipment hidden in the forest around the campsite. Concealed in a waterproof container about 50 yards from the remains was a sophisticated radio transmitter that appeared to have been operating for years, powered by a series of solar panels hidden among the tree canopy. GPS jamming involves overwhelming satellite navigation receivers with powerful radio signals that drown out normal GPS signals, and the device found at the site was specifically designed to interfere with GPS functionality in the immediate area. The transmitter was programmed to redirect GPS devices to the specific coordinates where Tommy's remains had been hidden, effectively turning the location into a technological trap that would draw people to the concealed crime scene. The sophistication of the equipment suggested that whoever had killed Tommy Brennan and hidden his body had possessed advanced knowledge of GPS technology and electronic warfare techniques. This was not a crime of passion or opportunity, but a carefully planned operation with technological components that indicated the perpetrator had both the resources and expertise to implement such a complex concealment strategy. Detective Santos' investigation revealed that the GPS interference device had been gradually drawing people to the location for years. Review of county records showed at least a dozen reports over the past 15 years of drivers experiencing GPS malfunctions in the area, though most had turned back rather than investigating the source of the interference. The Morrison family had been the first to actually reach the coordinates and discover what had been hidden there for over 3 decades. Their persistence in following the malfunctioning GPS, despite their family's apprehension, had finally brought Tommy Brennan home and reopened a case that had haunted his family for decades. The investigation into Tommy's murder revealed a complex web of circumstances that had led to his death. Further analysis of the electronic equipment and forensic evidence at the scene pointed to a suspect with military or intelligence background, someone who had the technical knowledge to construct sophisticated GPS jamming equipment and the tactical expertise to conceal evidence in such a remote location. Detective Santos worked with federal agencies who specialized in criminal GPS interference cases, as criminals had been known to use GPS jamming and spoofing for various illegal purposes. The case represented a new type of criminal behavior, using advanced technology not just to commit crimes, but to actively interfere with investigation efforts for decades. The breakthrough came when investigators traced the serial numbers on components of the GPS jamming device. The equipment had been purchased through a series of shell companies by Marcus Kellerman, a 58-year-old former military communications specialist who had been living under an assumed identity in West Virginia since the late 1980s. Kellerman had served in Army Signal Corps during the early 1980s, where he had gained expertise in electronic warfare and communications jamming. After his discharge, he had worked briefly as a civilian contractor for defense companies before disappearing from public records around the time of Tommy Brennan's disappearance. When federal agents arrested Kellerman at his remote cabin in the Monongahela National Forest, they discovered a workshop filled with sophisticated electronic equipment and detailed documentation of his GPS jamming operations. Kellerman had been monitoring news reports and police communications about his victim's case for over 30 years, adjusting and upgrading his jamming equipment to stay ahead of advancing GPS technology. During his confession, Kellerman revealed that he had encountered Tommy Brennan by chance while the young man was camping alone in the forest. What had begun as a robbery attempt had escalated to murder when Tommy had fought back and threatened to report Kellerman to authorities. Fearing that his true identity and military desertion status would be discovered, Kellerman had killed Tommy and spent weeks planning the elaborate concealment of his crime. The GPS jamming device had been Kellerman's insurance policy, designed to draw attention to the burial site if he ever decided to reveal the location of Tommy's remains. In his twisted logic, he believed that the technological sophistication of his concealment method would demonstrate his intelligence and technical skills to law enforcement agencies, potentially leading to some form of recognition or reduced sentence. Instead, the device had operated for decades as an unintended monument to his victim, periodically drawing innocent people like the Morrison family into his web of deception and murder. The psychological profile developed by FBI behavioral analysts suggested that Kellerman had been monitoring the effectiveness of his jamming device for years, possibly deriving satisfaction from the confusion and fear it caused to unsuspecting drivers. Marcus Kellerman was ultimately sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole for the murder of Tommy Brennan, as well as additional federal charges related to the illegal operation of jamming equipment and interference with navigation systems. Federal law strictly prohibits the use of GPS jamming devices, with no exemptions for personal use, and Kellerman's decades-long operation represented one of the most sophisticated illegal jamming cases ever prosecuted. For the Morrison family, the experience had been traumatic but ultimately meaningful. They had provided closure to Tommy Brennan's family after more than 30 years of uncertainty and grief. Tommy's parents, now in their 80s, were finally able to lay their son to rest and find some measure of peace after decades of wondering what had happened to him. The case also led to improvements in GPS security and anti-jamming technology. The Federal Communications Commission used Kellerman's jamming device as a case study in developing new detection methods for illegal GPS interference, and GPS manufacturers implemented additional safeguards to prevent similar manipulations of navigation systems. David Morrison, reflecting on their experience months later, often wondered about the chain of coincidences that had led them to Tommy Brennan's remains. If they had given up when the GPS first started malfunctioning, if they had found a different route around the dead zone, if they had decided not to investigate the persistent redirections, Tommy might have remained lost for another 30 years. "Sometimes I think Tommy was somehow guiding us there," Sarah told a reporter from the Richmond Times-Dispatch. "Our GPS malfunction led us exactly where we needed to be, exactly when we needed to be there. After all those years, maybe it was just time for him to be found." The story of the Morrison family's discovery became a cautionary tale about the vulnerabilities of GPS technology and the ways that criminals could exploit our dependence on digital navigation systems. But it also became a story of hope, proof that even the most carefully concealed crimes could eventually be brought to light, and that sometimes technology itself could become the tool that delivers justice. Virginia's Cold Case Database, which has helped bring attention to dozens of unsolved cases, now includes Tommy Brennan's case as a solved homicide, though investigators continue to review other cases for potential connections to Kellerman's activities. The database has become an invaluable resource for families seeking answers about missing loved ones and for law enforcement agencies working to solve decades-old crimes. Forest Service Road 847 has been permanently closed to public access, though the location remains marked in law enforcement databases as a significant crime scene. The GPS jamming equipment has been removed, and the area has been returned to its natural state, allowing the forest to reclaim what had been a monument to human tragedy. The Morrison family completed their Virginia vacation after providing their statements to investigators, though the experience had fundamentally changed their perspective on technology and trust. They now approach GPS directions with more skepticism and always carry paper maps as backup when traveling in unfamiliar areas. Most importantly, they carry with them the knowledge that their willingness to investigate an anomaly, despite their family's apprehension, had brought closure to another family's decades-long nightmare. Sometimes, they learned, following the wrong directions can lead you exactly where you're meant to be. Tommy Brennan was finally laid to rest in a cemetery near his hometown of Blacksburg, Virginia, surrounded by family members who had never stopped hoping for his return. His gravestone bears the inscription "Finally Home" and includes a small GPS coordinate marker, not the coordinates where he was found, but the coordinates of his family home, where his memory lives on in the hearts of those who loved him.